I'm Mike Kelly from Omaha program of Project Healing Waters, and tonight we're going to tie a rusty rat. The I'll go to the recipe here. Um, the rusty rat is probably the most famous. Let me spotlight myself first. Hang on a second. Okay. Uh, Rusty rat's probably the most famous hair-wing Atlantic salmon pattern. Well, it does get its name from New Brunswick angler and fly tyer Roy Angus Thompson, RAT. He created the rat series in the early 1900s, but he did not invent the rusty rat. The fly shown here was a collaborative effort by Clovis Arsenault and angler Joseph Pulitzer II in 1949. So the story goes that in 1949, Joseph Pulitzer was fishing a black rat, basically very similar fly to the bottom one there, but the body was all peacock herl. Um, um, he was fishing a black rat that was tied for him by Clovis Arsenault. Clovis had used a rusty yellow thread to build up the shape underneath the peacock herl that was used for the entire body. Uh, Pulitzer had caught several salmon on the fly, and it was chewed up pretty good. The colored thread had come out through the body of the fly, but Pulitzer kept fishing with it and ended up landing a 40-pound salmon on the chewed up rat. So Pulitzer went to Clovis and told him of the success and asked him to try to make one. So Clovis tried to copy the fly as it appeared in its chewed up state. After several tries, Pulitzer was satisfied with what he made and named it the Rusty Rat. The original pattern actually had a black head, but sometime later the red thread head became the standard. So it's tied on a salmon hook, which we haven't really touched on before. And I'll get to the differences when we get there. The thread for the whole fly is red, and normally on any fly that uses floss for a body, I'll use white tying thread underneath it, because when the fly gets wet, the whatever the color of the thread underneath it will kind of show through, and it'll take the color off of what you have. The original recipe calls for a rusty yellow floss, and at least with the floss that I have, that's I think it's Danville, the 4-strand floss. I don't, yeah, it's Danville's. I don't see a rusty yellow color, and most of the rusty rats that are tied nowadays are with a yellow floss body. But I just figure if I use red thread for the whole fly, then if it does show through a little bit, then we're a little closer to rusty. The tag, which we haven't done before, and the rib is all oval gold tinsel, has an underwing of the yellow floss, same as used for the body. Now the wing is originally gray fox guard hairs, and it has a grizzly hen hackle. So for the most part, I'm going to stick to this recipe, but I will make a couple alterations just because of what I have. So change to my materials. So for the wing, which is kind of the most prominent portion of it, it calls for gray fox, but the gray fox that I have is pretty short, and I don't think I'm going to be able to use that for this fly. Very similar to the markings is gray squirrel tail. and a lot of them today are tied with that anyway. So that's what I'm going to use. And if you look at, this is badger fur. If you pull the guard hairs out of badger fur and compare it to this gray squirrel, it's almost identical in the markings as well. So there's a few different things that look very, very similar for the wing that you could use as a material. Again, I'm going to use yellow Danville's floss, medium oval gold French tinsel. The tail is going to be peacock sword, and we touched on that with the was it the Zug Bug, I think, and then peacock herl for the front half of the body, and then a grizzly hackle. So I don't have, this is another alteration I'm doing. I don't have grizzly hen hackle. So I'm going to use a larger saddle hackle from the outside of the, this is a half neck of grizzly. If you use some of these out on the outside, that starts to get kind of more into the saddle hackle size, and it should give me barbs that are long enough to use. So I'll switch to the hook. And this is a salmon hook. And you'll notice the eye is kind of peculiar. It's folded over. And this is called the return. And so the way you tie the fly, the way most people tie their flies, they use the ribbing and other materials to just kind of fill up that space and smooth it out. Some of the more modern salmon hooks, this return is actually tapered down to where it blends in more with the shank. Another thing that's kind of peculiar on these hooks is normally when we talk about the hook shank, it ends about where the barb is, straight above the barb. But if you look here, straight above the barb, we're already well down into the bend. So that's why most salmon flies, you see them tied pretty much to the point of the hook is the end of the shank. So most Atlantic salmon flies will end pretty much at the point of the hook. So again, to start off, since this is a pretty large hook, I don't think I'll have too much trouble with 210 denier. Red thread. So I'm going to come up here on the return a little bit, leave myself some room for a head, and I'll just tightly wrap over that and then come down off of that return. And then I'll lay a thread base. You can see, I think with this thicker thread, I think you can see that that thread has twists in it. And that's from every time you, like Dave was talking last week, every time you turn the thread like that, it imparts another twist in the thread. So if you take your thread and turn it, twist it in the counterclockwise, if you were looking down on it, that flattens the thread. So then you can take a few more wraps before you start to notice it getting twisted up again. That's something to keep in mind, and we'll talk about that a little bit on the dubbing section of this later. It's a good way to keep from building up a lot of bulk in your fly body. There's times when you want a corded up thread, and there's times where you just want a little bit more of a flat appearance. So right now I'm at the hook point, and you can see I'm pretty much right at the end of the flat part of the shank. So it's at this point I'm going to take a piece of this French oval tinsel, . And I'm going to take a pretty decent piece, about maybe 8 inches at least. I want to make sure I have enough. And I'm going to place this under the hook. I'll come in from the other side. Now, one thing I wanted to show you, you see, as I was trying to grab that thread, you see how that jumped back? That's part of the problem with that twist of the thread. So I'm going to come around like this, and I don't want it to jump back that far. So I'm going to give it a little bit of a clockwise spin, and now it's going the other way. So I want this to grab that tinsel underneath the hook shank, and I don't want to have that stick out into my body very far at all. I want to take about maybe 6 turns, and then I'm going to come back to where the end of that was, right here. And now with loose spirals, I'm just going to move my thread out of the way by moving it toward the front of the hook. That'll give me room to work with this, what's called the tag. Normally on your fancy flies, the tag is 5 turns. So there's 1, there's 2, 3, and you can kind of snug that with your fingernail if you have to. 4, 5, and then I'm going to back that thread back to where I was. There. And then I'm going to tie that off underneath. And now I'm going to take spaced wraps here with a pretty flat thread. It's twisting up a little bit. I'm going to give it a counterclockwise turn. I don't want to see this spiral, but I want to get this rib up toward the front. And that's so I don't have any lumps and bumps. I want to come right up to where that return is, right there. And now I'm going to take my, this is 4-strand rayon floss. I'm going to tie this in at the front, wrap back, and then come back to the front. So if I used all 4 strands of this, that would probably be too bulky. So, well, let me give it a shot here. I think with this big of a hook, I think I'll be okay. So I'm going to tie this in with a little bit of floss sticking out the front. Let me do this a different way. Tie my floss in, give it about 3 or 4 wraps, and then I'll just carefully pull that where the floss goes underneath it. Now with nice tight wraps, I'll come back forward. Got a step. Pull that out of there. and get rid of some of those wraps. I forgot to move my floss back to the back. So I brought it forward so that we wouldn't have bumps in the body. And then right here, I'm going to reverse it back and keeping on the bottom, on the lower back side here. I'm going to go back toward the back, give it another spin to flatten it out. So now I have the rib back here in the back to use for ribbing. And I haven't left a big bump here. If I would have just ended that tag and then tied it off here, I would have a big bump there. So the next step, until I haven't tied these in a while, I want about 4 to 5 peacock sword barbules. So those come off a peacock sword. They're the angular feathers that are on the sides of the eye in the tail. And I want to orient those so that they're curved upward. So I'll just kind of mess with it a little bit. Those are curved upward. Okay. So right here, I'm going to lean it a little bit towards me. Give it a good wrap. Make sure those look right. Those curved a little bit. Let me reset those. That's a little better. Now I'll move forward again with flat thread. Keeping those from twisting around. Might need to just trim the butts of those a little bit. Okay. Now I'm ready for the floss. So I'll line these tips up again. And I'm going to go ahead and cut that so I have a nice smooth starting point. Tie it in a little bit long. 3 or 4 wraps, and then pull that under those wraps carefully. And then a few tight wraps back to the front. Now, try to zoom out a little bit here if it'll work. I'm going to take this floss and just stroke it in my fingers, and make sure you have nice clean fingers. You don't want a bunch of oil on your hands or been working out in the garden. And just try to get it to where those strands of floss are all pretty much aligned. And then put my rib in a material clip so it's out of the way. And I'll wrap that floss to the back. Watch the hook point. This floss is kind of delicate, and if you hit that hook point, you'll know it. Get that right to the base of the tail, and then move it back forward. Some people use a bobbin for this floss. And sometimes when you're using a bobbin, it can floss out on you, stretch out to where the fibers are all spaced apart. But that just kind of helps you get a smooth body, and it usually doesn't cause trouble. So I'm going to back this off again. Again, that keeps me from having too much bulk. And I'm going to tie this down. Come forward a couple of wraps, but then I'm going to take that floss and wrap back over it. And I want to come back here to about a third, about right there. And then this will act as the underwing. So just to keep that out of the way, I'll move back to the front and just take one wrap over that floss, point it out that way. So now I'll take my ribbing. Oh, I don't want to do the ribbing yet. Okay, there's my underwing. Now I need peacock herl for the front part of the body. I took 2 strands of peacock herl. I'm going to clip the thicker part of the butts off and tie those in. I'm going to come back here and leave my thread hanging. And then I'll wrap that peacock herl behind my thread. And that should, the weight of the bobbin should keep those from splitting as I wrap it forward. So that's about enough. Tie that off and then I can break those loose. Now is where I want to move my floss out of the way and start my rib. So being on the bottom far side, as I come forward like this, it doesn't follow the tail. Now I'll just take nice spaced wraps. Number 4 goes right behind that floss, and now I can let go of that. Bring that back this way. And then I'll take a wrap right in front to cover up that, whoops, right? Even space, we put it right about here and then forward. Tie that down and then clip it out of the way. Now I want that underwing to go back almost the end of that tail. And there's that. Now for my wing, I'm going to use squirrel tail, gray squirrel. Clip it close to the skin. And then I'll just hold it by the very tips and just take out all this junk, the shorter ones and the under fur. I will go ahead and stack that. So there's my wing material. I want it to be right about there. I'll mark it with these fingers. Got those butts. I'll lean it a little bit towards my now. When I went to wrap around those butts, my thread's moving forward. So if I spin it counterclockwise as I'm looking over it, now it reaches back and grabs those butts. And that's what I want it to do. I'm going to tie that down real tight. And make sure there's a nice ramp here without a step. Now I got my wing and my underwing. And now since I'm using this saddle hackle, I don't want to use a real thick stem. That stem could split on me and it's going to cause a lot of bulk. I want to go back here to where the stem starts to get flexible and thins out quite a bit. And then I'll strip these back. Once I cut away that stem. Now with the shiny side facing me, so the dull side's facing down, I'm going to tie in that stem, come around the back of it. Some wing in there. Make sure that's nice and tight. Now I want a little bit of stem showing right here at the base. And I'll just try to fold these back a little bit so they start sweeping back. I want about 3 or 4 turns here. That looks like a pretty good amount. So I'll do a couple turns and then I'll come back here. Thread's flattening out quite a bit, so I'm going to spin it. And start down here, the front. And just work back up against that hackle. To give me a nice smooth cone shape head. And press up against that hackle. And then with the tip of my scissors, I'll snip that out. Go to the back of the head and whip finish toward the front. And then this is an excellent fly to use UV head cement, UV resin for the head. I was hoping it would darken that thread just a little bit, and it did. And there's a rusty rat.
Very nice, Mike. Very nice.
A few little mistakes in there because I did it out of memory and it's been a few years, but
Yeah, but the recovery technique is what's also important. So
yeah. A lot of your Atlantic salmon flies will have that little tag at the end. There's terms that, tag and butt, and you get a lot of underwings. That's always been one of my favorite flies to look at. I tie them.
I was talking to a guide in Asabo, Michigan this week about getting a steelhead trip planned. And he said that the fishery out of Lake Huron has completely changed since I was there. I used to catch big kings. They've completely shut off the supply of kings, and now they've gone to all Atlantics. They said because the Atlantics they come up and spawn and then go back. So I had never known that before, that the Atlantic salmon didn't spawn and die.
I'll say I know nothing about salmon, except the flies are real pretty.
Yeah, that they are. And you can use the same flies for steelhead too. That's just the fun part.
And there's nothing saying you can't catch a smallmouth or something like that on there either. I really like using the salmon hooks. I like the way they look, the fly looks when they're finished. So William's not here. Oh, yes, he is. Hello, William Klumper.
Hi, sir.
I said that I was going to do a deep dive on dubbing. So first thing that I think would be important to get into, and I kind of alluded it to it a little bit on this fly, is it's good to understand that whole thing about the thread spin. So I'm just going to start this thread on a big old hook so I have lots of room to do different things. And just by tying that on, you can see in my thread that there's some twists in there. Bill, okay, got it. So that does a few things. For one thing, if you every time you take a turn of your thread, you're adding another twist, another twist, another twist. Now, one thing that does is it cords up your thread and makes it thin, and it makes it stronger. If your thread is flat, so you have just if I spin it, in this case, if I spin it counterclockwise as I look down on it, you can see that flattens the thread out. That also kind of flosses it a little bit, and so it's not as strong in that condition as if you twist it up really tightly. It's a lot stronger. If you're doing something like foam or deer hair, if you get really corded up thread that's really strong and you bite into that foam, you can actually cut through it. Sometimes with deer hair, you pull real tight, and next thing you know, your deer hair just goes falling off because you've actually cut through it. Like I was saying in that fly, in a lot of traditional wet flies and salmon flies, you want a real smooth body, so you would want your thread to be relatively flat. So you would spin it in another direction. You hear a lot of people say, I want to make my thread flat, so I'm going to spin it counterclockwise as if I'm looking down on it. The thing to understand is, sure, that did in this case, because I'm normally wrapping, from myself over the hook this way. So it puts twists in the thread so that when you do have those twists and I spin it like that, it's going to flatten the thread. But if I keep spinning it, now all of a sudden it's corded the other way. So I can spin it counterclockwise all I want. It's only going to get tighter. So if you just picture it as flat thread, the key is not what direction you twist it. It all depends on, where you're starting from. So right now I've got pretty flat thread. Now, again, we're going to cover a few different, I don't have my bodkin still upstairs. But you can split the thread like this and kind of make your own dubbing loop when it's flat. And like I said, you can also, smooth out a body by making it flat. Every time you do a few turns, it adds another twist. So you go about maybe 8 or 10 times, and then you might have to twist it again. So thread twist is important. The other thing that I alluded to was when tying on materials, if your thread is twisted, let me spin it clockwise as if I was looking down on it. And you'll see my thread, when I relax it a little bit, it wants to lean forward. So I'm trying to tie my material on and my thread's going that way. That's really frustrating. But if I spin it back this way, then the twist's in the other direction. And that can really help with things like an elk hair caddis. You have your wing already cut and you place it down there, and you want your thread to jump back toward your fingers so you can grab that hair and pull it down. So that can really help you tie a material down if your thread is spun in the right direction. Again, the alternative, if it's spun the other way, is when I relax it, it comes forward. So everybody understand that thread stuff? Kind of help you with thread control and tying in materials. So the first thing I'm going to hit on is what I always say is probably the easiest for me to dub with is superfine dubbing. The reason is there's a lot of dubbings out there. As a matter of fact, Al's dubbing that they produce is very similar in texture to that superfine. The soft touch dubbing here, very similar in texture to that superfine. But with this superfine that you get in the, sold in these packages, you can buy them in little bags or in these boxes like this. The key to this is that the fibers are really, really long. And if you use small amounts, you don't necessarily need to use wax or anything else if you just use very small amounts. You can see with this that I have in front of that thread, it's just a very little, you can see right through it. You can see the thread through it. But when you twist that on the thread, those fibers are all long, and you didn't actually see what I was doing, but I actually kind of stretched those so that they would be parallel to the thread, and they just twist around the thread. So as you're wrapping that, even though I just put a little bit of dubbing on there, you can hardly see that red thread at all. Now, we were talking about thread twist. So that brings up a very important point with dubbing. I'll use something I don't use a lot of. I'll use some of this, maybe this pink here. We talked about every time as you're wrapping your thread, if you were looking at the eye of the hook, and this is from Al's book, if it's 12 dubbing techniques is the name of the book. As you're doing this, if you looked at the eye, toward the eye of the hook, you'd be going clockwise, right? And every time you do that wrap of the thread, you're adding another twist in your thread. So when you're putting dubbing on there, I'll take my dubbing and kind of, this is called carding it, when you kind of stroke it like that to make sure all the fibers are going the same direction and they're kind of up and down. So when you take your dubbing and you twist it onto your thread, you want to twist it onto your thread in a clockwise direction. So as I'm looking at that, I want to wrap that in a clockwise direction. So then every time I turn, it's actually, once it grabs that tip, it's actually twisting the dubbing. So I don't have to keep going back there, grabbing my dubbing and tightening it and tightening it, and tightening it. So the direction you twist it onto your thread, most people say twist it in one direction only, which is true. But if you twist it in the right direction, as you wrap that dubbing, it's going to get tighter and tighter, and you won't have to go in there every once in a while and twist it.
So, Mike, Bill, so if you're going from gap to head, you twist it on clockwise or counterclockwise?
So I was actually going in the wrong direction. If normally you'll start your dubbing at the end of the hook and go forward. So I'll do that again. So put a very
Mike,
small amount on the thread.
Kind of important to note, Mike, that the clockwise direction that you're talking about twisting the dubbing is if you were standing on the hook shank and looking down.
Standing on the hook shank and looking down.
Correct.
So did I go the right
Yeah,
direction?
and it
Oh
shouldn't
yeah,
make any.
you did
Okay.
everything perfect, but you didn't. You
Okay.
just mentioned clockwise
Right.
direction, but it needs to be in relation to
Right.
something.
Right. So you see, as I'm twisting this, as I'm wrapping here, that's staying twisted up.
Yeah, and it shouldn't make any difference whether you're wrapping back to front or front to back, Bill, which way you twist it on, because the threads is always going to twist the same way whether you're coming back to front or front to back.
Now, another thing here, Kelly Gallup always talks about this. How do I know if I have the right amount of dubbing? If I use this much dubbing and I drop it, it sinks pretty fast, right? If I take a bunch of that away and I drop it, it just kind of floats around real slow. It floats off to the side. So that's what he tries to teach people, to use the right amount of dubbing is if it drops really fast, you have too much. He always says, take the amount you need, cut it in half, and then you still probably have too much. So make it real thin, twist it on your thread. And then if you're going from front to back with your dubbing, like this, when you get to the end, you can use your tying thread then to rib your dubbing. So I'm going to take that hook out. If you've heard of the fly, the RS2, I cheated and tied my microfibet tails in yesterday. I'm going to put this, that's a size 18 hook, so I'm going to have to tighten my vise. I already put the tails in. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And Rim Chung uses a technique that's very similar to what I saw one time it was called the Dave Whitlock method. And that's just what the guy called it. Whether he's full of it or not, I don't know. The dubbing that he uses looks very similar to Superfine. I thought I would kind of show you how to use if you just want to use some natural material. So this is a little, it's new actually. It's a little piece of beaver that I got from Jay Stockard. About a 2-inch by 2-inch thing of beaver. So if you look at this, you've got all this under fur and then these longer guard hairs on the top. So I'm going to grab a little bit off of this corner and clip it close to the skin. So that's what I have. So I'm going to take these guard hairs and get them out of there. little bit of
Bring it
mess
down a
here.
little, Mike. You're out of,
Okay.
there you go. Okay.
Try to get all those guard hairs out of there. So now mostly all I have here is just beaver underfur. Beaver, muskrat, otter, mink, a lot of those animals that live in and around the water normally make good dry fly dubbing. Rabbits, squirrels, possum, those kind of things. Usually the fur gets all waterlogged and it doesn't make good. So Rim Chung will put his hook in a little hemostats that's clamped to the table. That's all he uses for a vise. And he just very purposely sits there and just cards his dubbing like this. And then he'll take it after it's just kind of mixed up. He'll take it and just twist like a little end in it like that. I'll set that down for now to get some thread on the right here. Thread back on the hook. So he says like a Chinese paintbrush. Just put a little tip there like that. And he'll twist that on. And then he holds the rest of the clump. So then with every turn of the thread, he's actually twisting that dubbing tighter and tighter. So I'm going back toward the back here. Now I'll move forward and you can see that clump of dubbing now is being twisted around the thread. So it's almost a segmented body all the way toward the front. Then when he gets here, he actually will stop and pull that all the way. I'm actually going to cut that. I had a little bit too big of a clump. Clean up that head a little bit. Now, right back in here, just real quick, he takes this fuzz from a, I just grabbed a, this is a hen hackle, but he'll just grab some of this fuzz from a, like a saddle hackle or just this fuzzy marabou-like stuff from the base of a feather. And he'll tie that stuff in. Like that. Take a little bit more dubbing. Just a little. Wrap it around the base and back just to make a little bit thicker of a thorax. And then whip finish. And then it'll take this wing, come up like this, and very ridiculously chop the wing like that. So then when that lays in the surface film, that just looks like a cripple with a little stub wing like that. My wing ended up a little bit too far back, but I mainly wanted to show the dubbing technique on that actual fly. So
This will be one of those 1,000 times I watched the video.
I think that's kind of entertaining to watch him do those. So the if you want a good birthday or Christmas gift idea, You can get one of these dubbing kits from Al. It comes with this dubbing wax, which I have right here, tacky, and then a bunch of different colors of dubbing. You can kind of pick what you want for the dubbing. So I'm going to take, there's that purple stuff. This is soft touch dubbing. You can see it's very similar to that superfine, but it's very short little fibers. So first thing, I'm just going to clip this tag out of the way and move my kit. All right. So when I'm ready to dub my body, let me lay down a little bit of a thread base. First thing I want to do is I'm going to zoom out a little bit here again. Stretch out some of my thread here. And then put some wax on my thread. I only want to, you don't want to do too long of a section of dubbing. You can always add to it later. If you get it too long, it gets out of control. But I want to apply the wax to the thread. So now the thread's real sticky. So now without even taking that dubbing out of the package, I can just touch that dubbing to the thread. I'm getting carried away. Touch that dubbing to the thread, and it makes you basically put on a healthy amount of dubbing. Now, obviously, this lump off to the side needs to go. But now that thread's holding as much dubbing as it can hold. So now I can twist it like this, and that wax will help adhere it to the thread. And since I didn't use too much, I've got a really nice dubbing loop, or not dubbing loop, noodle, they call it. And I can just wrap that back to the back. That's called touch dubbing. And if you like using dubbing, one thing about your dubbing wax, it'll find all the dubbing on your desk. So you got to put the lid back on it. Kind of along that same, I should do it on, yeah, let me grab, just for now, I'll grab this other little hook. Maybe 1800s or earlier in England. In the North Country, they do a lot of soft hackles. I know John wants to call them tenkara flies with the hackle the wrong way. But one of my favorites and one of the most popular is called a water hen bloa, B-L-O-A. And basically it's a yellow thread, but they basically touch dub with mole fur. But they don't twist it. So it's pretty interesting. The intent is actually for the thread to show through a little bit on this. So here's a little patch I have of moleskin. And obviously it's so short. Look how short that fur is. You don't go in there and clip a bunch of it necessarily. The best way to do it is just to kind of go like this and just pluck out a bunch of it. And then you just take that and just touch it to the thread. Very similar to what we did with that soft touch dubbing. Just touch it onto that thread. Oops. And then wrap the body forward. And you actually want the yellow thread. They actually use silk, but you want that thread and that sparse dubbing like that to make up the body of the fly. And then in the front then would be a soft hackle. The water hen that they originally used, it's not as easy to find. So a lot of times they'll do these with starling or dove hackle, any other little small gray hackle that you have. But you can see that thread through it. But most of that doesn't pull out because it's actually wrapped underneath those strands of thread.
And if you don't want to use mohair, Mike, they're actually making this thread now. That's mohair thread.
This is mole as in the little rodent.
Oh, okay.
MOLE.
Yeah,
But
I
I know what
found
you're
this.
talking about. There's a thread that does have that.
Yeah, that's it
shaggy
right there.
appearance. It looks very similar to that.
Yeah. I've used this on some flies that I've tied.
Oh, here, let me.
Yeah, well, we don't see your picture, John.
Oh, okay.
There you are.
There you
All right.
go. I move it the right way there.
Yep. I can
But
see
you
that.
can see the cord through it and the fibers from the mohair.
Okay. Well, let's do a dubbing loop real quick, and then I'll show you a dubbing brush. All right. So for a dubbing loop, let me go back here a ways. Now I'm just taking my thread here. Zoom out again. Taking my thread here and just make a loop in it. And then you want to wrap around the shank a couple times and then come around that loop. Like make a couple full turns around there and then come back on. What that does is closes the top of that loop. Especially on this bigger hook, if I didn't do that, I'd have a gap there. So if I'm trying to close materials in here, I wouldn't be able to do that. So I can take any kind of, see if I still have some dubbing left here. Here's some. Just grab some junk off my desk and just kind of stick it in there.
Mike, fibers lengthways or parallel or perpendicular to the thread, or do you want it consistently parallel to the thread or near parallel to the thread?
That's up to however you want to do it. I'll show you a
Okay.
couple examples. So this this Angora goat, I bought some red and some black because it's supposed to be a very close substitute to seal's fur. And I wanted to do some I don't know if it's Irish or Scottish, the Bibio. They're different lock style flies called for seal's fur. And so I got these and I just had a double of a time trying to work with it. Very coarse. And somebody said they had trouble dubbing with ice dub. To me, this is harder than ice dub. You try twisting that on, it's just like, it's crazy. So what you can do is stick that in between those two threads like that. Use, I don't have like a fancy dubbing whirl, but a lot of times I'll just use a test clip style hackle pliers. Attach it and then just twist it. You can spin it. And then you're basically, the fibers are trapped between the two threads. And so as you do your dubbing loop, those two threads hold everything together, but it also twists it, among itself here. So that stuff that was so unruly and everything is starting to get even color the thread to where the thread looks black.
Mike, you went counterclockwise on that?
Let's see, I guess as I'm looking at it, I was going clockwise.
Okay,
Um,
got it. Joel, my bad.
so then as you wrap that, that's going to, of course, be a shaggier body. Another thing you can do with a dubbing loop is even wax one side of it, touch some fibers in there, and then twist it up. What I wanted to do you kind of get the concept of a dubbing loop, or you want me to show you another example?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
But-
So let me just get a different hook.
Others in the program may watch it, so
This time I'll do it with some ice dub. So I'll start my thread. I'll make my loop. I'm only going about 2.5, 3 inches because I don't want it to get too long. But wrap all the way around it to close that top off there, and then come back out of the way. So there's my dubbing loop. Now they have these, I do have this gadget, and I really haven't gotten the hang of having fun with it, but it basically holds your thread apart like that. I don't know if you can see that. And then as you twist it, it closes it off from the top down. I've just never really gotten the hang of that where it is fun for me to do. But this time I will wax one side. I'll take some ice dub, which can be very difficult to work with sometimes, and just stick it in between there. And you can taper it if you want. You can have it, more material toward the back, and less material toward the beginning. So as you're wrapping it, you'd have a more of a tapered body. Stick all this on that. In between the threads, pull it shut. And then as I spin, see how that tightens up into a nice, pretty material to use. Then if you grab like right into the base of that right there and wrap around one of these plunger style hackle pliers, wrap it around a few times and you can cut this loose, and then wrap with that instead of having that whole tool behind you. And that makes ice dub a whole lot easier to work with. experiment with that a little bit. And see if you can make it easier.
I make my dubbing, it may waste a bit of thread, but I make my dubbing loop a lot longer so that it sort of rests on the table and I can use two hands to put any material in.
That's a good idea too.
Waste a bit of thread, but then, yeah.
Now, along the same line, this is not what I wanted. Stand up here and get some wire. Here it is. I've got a lot more silver wire than gold wire, so I'm going to use some of that. There's another pretty similar concept, and it's called a dubbing brush. And these can be pretty fun. I'm going to take about maybe 10 inches of wire here, maybe a little bit more. And I think I'll still use the same hook. I'm going to split it evenly on the hook here. Actually, I think what I might do is just find the middle. That. And then tie these ends on there. Now I basically have like a dubbing loop made of wire. Grab a tool out of my drawer here real quick. All right. And I'm going to switch to, if it still works, my materials camera. And maybe zoom in a little bit. All right, I'm going to take this note card, set it there. And I've got some CDC, little shot glass here. And as I use CDC and I have some left over, I don't throw the rest of that feather away. I clip off all the little CDC fibers.
What does CDC stand for, please?
Col de Canard. It's a feather that is, I don't know, I think sometimes it's more expensive than others, but it's from a preen gland on a duck, and it has properties that help it to really have a lot of flotation, but it also moves a lot in the water because it has little fine barbules. I'm just going to take some of that, put it right on the edge of that card. And I had this hackle that I used earlier. Has some nice barring in it. I'm going to clip some of those. Kind of spread those around. I want to get
Mike, can you move the card a little bit more to the left? There. Yeah, there you go.
I want to get these I'm going to do these a little more deliberate. I want to get these to be kind of horizontal here. I didn't do a very good job on the other ones. Okay. Let me get some stuff out of my waste bin here. Here's some under fur from something. Put those across here. Some thread. I guess that doesn't hurt to be in there. Put a little ice dub in there. And a little squirrel tail. So I'm just kind of mixing this along the length of that edge of that card there. So then, if this works, I'm going to take it actually to the edge where you can't see, I don't think. Me. Take it over the edge here and slide it off the card into this clip. I've got all this stuff in that clip. Now I'll switch cameras. And I know this is probably the ugliest stuff to put together for a dubbing brush, but you get the point. And I can take that clip and sandwich that in between that wire. Then where's my little tool? I can close that off. So the wire's tight. And then I can spin that. As you go, you can kind of fluff it a little bit. The longer hairs are going to want to kind of wrap around each other. We'll say you were doing some kind of streamer body or something. You can put all different kinds of materials in here. Micro crystal flash, EP fibers. There's all kinds of things you can put in there. And now if you look at this wire, it's all twisted real tight. I don't know if you can see that good. Wire's twisted real tight, and that'll stay together. So you can kind of pull the loose stuff out of there. But you can see I've got some squirrel tail in there, some badger, some ice dub, red thread, all kinds of stuff. Now you can clip that off of there and just save it. And then if you're ever doing a streamer body, you can just take that material, I'll shorten it with those hackle pliers like I did before. Cut this off. That was such a long loop. And then you can start wrapping it and just stroke those back with touching wraps. Like that, just keep stroking it back. And all that stuff that you put in there, whatever colors you want to have or materials. You can stick with a few different materials, like say you want to do a lot of badger hair or something you have a lot of. You can see how that'd give you a pretty bulky body with whatever materials you want to have in it. That's the concept of a dubbing brush. If you do it with stiffer materials, you could do that, and then you could shape it, you know, say into the shape of a minnow or whatever you want it to be. But it's got all the materials in it that you wanted to add. That way you can just kind of make your own concoctions of, like I said, EP fibers. There's all kinds of synthetics. You could add some, you know, things like marabou. You could kind of going through my trash bin. Different colors of hackle. You can put clumps of dubbing in there. You want to fuzz it up some.